live. Good morning, it's Sunday morning, it's the 9th of July, and I am reading out of Life as Carola. This is a book by Joan Grant, who lived 1907 till 1989, and she wrote about her past incarnations, her lives, and this is her life as Carola. Carola was born on the 4th of May, 1510. We are now, well, she's now a teenager, but she was the illegitimate daughter of Lord Griffin and was banished with her mother from the castle and has had a tough life, but she has also had good moments. And we are now, she has had a sea journey. I think she's in her late, maybe early 20s. I don't know, she's grown up now. It writes about her life from the beginning. And this is chapter 15, and they have had a rough sea journey, and they are now in FIUME, this place in Italy, before the Renaissance. Winter in FIUME. Before he left, the captain had found 2 little rooms over a ship's chandlers for us. It was on the waterfront, and at night I used to lie listening to the water, sucking at the wooden piers of the wharf. When a ship was loading, carts used to grind over the cobblestones, and I could hear the rumble of the casks as they thudded down into the holds. It was easy to tell when a ship had made port after a long voyage by the vomit on the streets outside the tavern. We knew that in FIUME it would be difficult for Petruccio to earn money as a jester, for the frequenters of the harbour taverns were mostly foreigners who could not understand Italian. But we had saved enough money to keep us through the time the captain expected to be away. And he had promised that on his return he would give us passage to his home port of Naples. I hid our bag of money under a loose floorboard in my room, because Petruccio thought it unsafe to carry it about with us. His leg refused to heal, and at last even he could not bear the pain of walking, and he had to keep to his room. The chandler's wife let me cook on her fire, and I used to go down to the market to buy our food. Fish was plentiful, and it was easy to get meat. But at this season of the year, the price of fruit or butter was too high for me to afford any. I missed being able to gather my own wild pot herbs. I had never lived out of the sight of growing things before. In all the little villages and towns where I had been, it had taken only a few minutes to get out of the shadows of buildings. Petruccio often asked me if I still had the ring which that other bastard of the Griffin had given me, and he made me repeat my promise that if he died, I should go to the house of the White Sisters for sanctuary. I had a picture of it in my mind, high white walls which shut away the turmoil of the world, quiet cloisters with white doves strutting among the ordered pots, and muted bells to mark the gentle hours. But I put the thought of it away from me, for I knew that that there I should have no Petruccio. I was so afraid of having to live without him. I never found out who stole our money. I think it was the squinting son of the chandler, but I knew it would be useless to accuse him. He would have only denied it, and his parents would have turned us out. I did not tell Petruccio it was gone, for it would have made him unhappy to know that our livelihood depended on what I could earn. The shop next door was owned by a meat pickler. I earned a little money there, helping to fill the casks and nail down the lids. Much of what went into the brine tubs to feed the sailors was the refuse of the meat market. In some of the casks the meat was packed in dry salt. In others, gobbets lay half obscured in the picking, like the brew in Sorcerer's Cauldron. I saw pigs' eyes floating on the surface of one of them like monstrous frog spawn. I used to find other work as well as this, for that the briner gave me was not enough to pay our lodgings, and to buy even a little food. There was a tavern along the quay which was owned by an elderly woman. She was always dressed in black, very soberly, though in cloth of rich quality. She walked with a stick, but her carriage was erect and imperious. She seemed to have a flavour of Donna Isabella, so perhaps that was why I did not go to her sooner to ask for work. But at last I had to, for I could find it nowhere else. I went to the tavern in the morning. The shutters had not yet been taken down, but when I rattled the latch it was opened to me by a loutish boy. Just inside the door was a dais. It was surrounded by a railing, and behind it, the proprietress sat at an oak table, tallying up the score of the week's takings. Her voice was sharp when she asked me why I had come. Then she said, "There's no work for you here. You're too thin. Chickens and girls should both be plump." But why should my being thin affect my playing? Long fingers are more nimble than fat ones on the strings. Won't you hear me before deciding against me? A lutenist? She looked surprised. Can you sing? Not sickly romances, but the kind of songs that make a sailor laugh? I said I would try, and sitting down on the edge of a table, I began one of the songs that Lucia had sung when I first knew her, and I tried to play it as she would have done. Though I knew the woman liked it, I dared not haggle over the price. She accepted the little that she offered. I accepted the little that she offered, and it was arranged that I should play there from 6 in the evening until they put the shutters up. Before I went out, the woman looked at me piercingly and said, "You understand you are here as a lutenist? It is the only thing I require for you for. If you try to interfere with other people's work, you will be dismissed at once. Everything here is very orderly. You are here to play the lute, and play the lute you shall, and nothing else, except singing, of course." I started work that evening. The proprietress seemed to know most of her customers by name, and I was amused to see that she made them stick their daggers into a board behind her table. One man, he must have been a newcomer, protested, and she said to him, "Did you think you would need to draw a knife in my tavern? If so, you'd better walk along the quay until you find a cutthroat meeting place. Plenty of them there are, as you will soon find. I'm honest, good, God-fearing woman, and I will permit no brawling here." In every way she was very strict. If a drunken man tried to grab at me as I walked between the tables, she shouted at him, and he would look sheepish as a child caught stealing sugar. If a man got truculent, he found himself thrown out by the huge Negro servant she employed, or, if he was sober enough to pull himself out, he might be dropped into the harbour. When they were very drunk, she left them to sober up on the wharf side, because, as she said, if customers get drowned, people begin to talk about it, and that is bad for my business. Opposite the door to the quay, there was another, which at first I thought must be a back entrance. Then I noticed that some men walked straight across the room and through the other door. And I knew it could not lead into the street. But it was only when the proprietress called out to a man who was trying to pull me down beside him, "Go into the back room if you want to drop enough anchor between a pair of thighs," that I realized it was not a tavern she owned, but a brothel. The Drabs all lived together in the back room. There were low partitions, not reaching to the roof between each pallet, of which there were 4 on either side of the room, and dirty curtain on a string gave them a great illusion of privacy. From 7 in the evening until midnight their earning belonged to the house, and during these hours they had to wait in their cubicles for customers. But what they made at another time they kept for themselves. They had a code of rules amongst themselves which they never broke. Each girl was responsible for the men she brought into the room. If he was fighting drunk and created too much of a disturbance, she had to put half his fee into the common fund, from which they paid the little gutter boy who cleaned the floor. This boy sat outside in the doorway with a ship's mop and a wooden bucket and ran in to clean up the vomit as the sound of a protesting stomach. But though he was very nimble, a sour smell always clung to the floor of beaten earth. In the daytime the girls used to gather around a large table under the high window at one end of the room to sew or gossip or gamble away their earnings to each other at dice. They were much lower in the scale of harlotry than Lucia had ever been, and yet some of them had achieved a magnificent detachment. Lucia talked about her work, as if her body were a mule she hired out for a day's work to a carter. She took more trouble than did the others with her appearance, and would cut thread by thread the frayed edges of her velvet dress, or mend with fine, careful stitches a rent in her chemise or a torn ruffle. Another of them, I think, if she had one or less thought, she would have been an idiot, seldom talked to anyone. She was very lousy, and used to sit scratching herself slowly and despairingly, like a dying monkey. Maria was pregnant, but her striped skirt was very full, and the old woman, had not yet noticed. Maria was terrified that she would be turned out. She dreaded being alone and having to wander around the alleys looking for men, for, she told me, girls who had no protection seldom got paid anything, and ran the risk of having their throats cut. I think the proprietress had a certain fondness for me, and she was not unkind to her girls. She treated them like a muleteer who keeps his animals in good condition, so that they will make him a better profit. She went to a church in another part of the town, where prosperous persons took their wives and families. Although she believed in hellfire, I am sure she never thought she was in any danger of it, for she had a great opinion of her own virtues. I have heard her say that if the sailors' mothers knew how well she looked after their sons, they would remember her in their prayers. The long cold weeks went slowly by. It was a season of bitter gales. The wind screamed down from the mountains, and the skies were low and sombre, leaden as coffin seals. My cloak was threadbare, and the cold gnawed at my fingers until there was blood on my lute strings. Petruchio used to sit at the window watching the grey horizon for the Santa Maria. Sometimes we thought we recognized her rig, but as the ship grew nearer, it was always a stranger. I prayed so hard for her to come back, and I should have gone on board her even when the gales were at their height. If only she would have taken us back to the Italy we knew. Whenever a new ship came into the harbour, and there were few of them at this season, I tried to get news of her from the crew. It was in January, 4 months after she had sailed, that I heard of her. She had foundered off Sicily, with all hands. Petruchio was desperate to get me away from FIUME. I think he already knew that he was dying, but he clung to life so fiercely that he made his body obey him. It was one evening while I was lute playing that I found a way to get back to our own country. No ship had come into the harbour for the last 2 weeks, and captains were delaying their sailings until more favourable weather. Several days had gone by without my seeing a new face in the tavern, when a stranger walked in. I could see by his dress that he was not a sailor, and his fur-lined cloak showed that he was a man of substance. Even the proprietress greeted him with respect, and herself led him to a seat by the fire. My song seemed to please him. He made me play the ones that caught his ear still long past the time I was usually allowed to go home. He was made very welcome by the company, for he threw gold on the table and said that they were all to be his guests. He looked so prosperous, yet wine brought him self-pity. He made me sit beside him, and while he stroked my hand, he told me his troubles. 3 days I had stayed in this town, listening to this accursed wind. I'm a merchant until I came to FIUME. I thought a wise one, for I found these foreigners profitable to trade with. Now my business is concluded, and I am trapped here by the sea. I have promised the Madonna that if she gets me safely back to Italy, there shall be a new statue of her in the cathedral. But the wind is so loud I doubt whether she can hear my prayers. You pray to the Madonna for a quiet passage. I pray to her for any passage, however rough, however dangerous, for it would get me back to friendly shore. Then he made me tell him my story from the time the Santa Maria had sailed. He looked at me, the solemn, stupid look of a drunken man who thinks he still possesses a keen judgment. He spaced his words carefully, as if they were a line of stepping stones from which he was afraid of slipping. He must judge each one separately and adjust his balance, moving on to the next. I'm a musician as well as a merchant. You may think merchants care only for trading, not for songs, but you're wrong. You may think merchants think only of money and have no generosity. That's wrong too. I will prove to you. I pay your passage, and you can also take the dwarf you say you travel with. That proves I'm generous. I make a bargain with you. I'm no fool to have money wheedled out of me, even by such pretty face as yours. You must play the flute to me, and sing, the louder and bawdier the better, to keep the noise of the winds out of my ears. Maybe it will make me forget these accursed seas. I shall shut my eyes and listen to you, and perhaps I'll believe that the ship's only swaying because I've drunk too much. I knew that he hoped for more than lute playing, but I was too happy at his offer to worry about the difficulties of the journey. It was hard to believe in our good fortune, and both Patricia and I were afraid it was only a drunkard's promise. But the merchant did not forget, and by the next evening we had sailed from FIUME. There's little to tell of our journey. There were no great storms, though the waves were high enough for our benefactor to have no stomach for lutanists. He was too busy protesting against the sea. He was a kind man, although queasy and something of a coward. He was so overjoyed to feel firm land under his feet that when we parted from him, he further increased our gratitude by a gift of money. So I think I finished this one here. Maybe I'll read another later.